Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. In the studio tonight, joining me by Skype, we have our regular contributor, Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group. Good evening to you, Chris.
How are we, Gordon?
And joining me on the left-hand side of your screen tonight is Day Tucker, our Rural Affairs spokesperson. Welcome back to the show, Day.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to dive straight into the coronavirus update. And as of 2 o'clock today in Scotland, there has been a total of 95,173 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 80,317 tests were confirmed negative. 14,856 tests were positive. 902 people were in hospital last night, whilst 43 were in intensive care, with another 8 with suspected COVID-19. This marks an increase of 105 confirmed new cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 2,221. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 36,042 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 338. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now to our first story this evening. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon's statement to Parliament at Holyrood today. The Scottish Government has published a route map setting out the phased approach to easing the lockdown restrictions while still suppressing coronavirus COVID-19. The route map gives details of a gradual 4-phase move out of the current state of lockdown. COVID-19 framework for decision-making, Scotland's route map through and out of the crisis gives practical examples of what people, organisations and businesses can expect to see changing over time. It also highlights some of the things that won't change for a while, including the continuing need for enhanced public health measures such as physical distancing. The evidence shows transmission of COVID-19 is under control and the number of infectious cases is starting to decline. The Scottish Government will consider moving to phase 1 of the route map following the next end-of-cycle review on the 28th of May. The NHS Scotland Test, Trace and Isolate support strategy, known as Test and Protect, will be ready for expansion in all 14 health boards by May the 28th. A plan agreed between councils, professional associations and parents' representatives to reopen schools on the 11th of August, subject to scientific advice that it's safe to do so, has also been published today. For now, the message to the public will still be to stay home. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said, "Today I have set out the details of Scotland's route map through and out of the COVID-19 crisis. The current key public health guidance remains to stay at home, except for essential purposes. But the route map provides information about how and when we might ease our lockdown restrictions whilst continuing to suppress the virus. The lockdown restrictions have been necessary to reduce and mitigate the massive harm caused by the COVID-19 virus. But the lockdown itself causes harm, including loneliness and social isolation, deepening inequalities and damage to the economy. And that is why I've set out a gradual and incremental phases by which we aim to ease the lockdown, matched with careful monitoring of the virus. At every one of these stages, the biggest single factor in controlling the virus will be how well we continue to observe public health advice. Continued hand washing, cough hygiene and physical distancing will continue to be essential, as will wearing a face covering where appropriate. By doing the right thing, all of us have helped to slow the spread of the virus and protect the NHS, and to save lives. And as a result, we are able gradually and cautiously and in phases to plan our move towards a new normality." Well, Day, this is a very detailed document that we're seeing today. I suspect that this is probably, I hope this is going to happen. I think a lot of people are really hoping it's going to happen on the 28th. Do you think we're on track for that? Does it look that way to you?
Well, I just keep putting my faith in Nicola Sturgeon, and I think she's got the right, sense of direction. It does worry me that the news media do seem to lead the way on this. I mean, it was yesterday that they were touting all of this. And what did we get? No, it must have been the day before yesterday. And then yesterday we got all these people on the beach at Portobello.
Yes, I saw that.
So it worries me that it's the media that seem to be leading what's going on.
Well, of course, the media has been
direct from her.
Do you think the media day has been raising expectations too high too soon?
Yeah, that's the word. That's exactly what I feel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, a comment from you. This is, as I say, a very detailed document, and it brings the lockdown to a gradual and phased sort of ending. But it does it in a variety of ways. But the thing I noticed about it, and I'm sure you'll have comments about this yourself, is the continued presence of things like social distancing, no matter how far eased the lockdown becomes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's only right. And the one important thing for me out of this is the fact that there are no hard, fast set dates other than the 28th, and with regards to the actual 4 phases.
Yeah.
So she has said continuously that she will be guided by the science, and if the science says to her that there is, an increase, then she will quite rightly roll back from it. And I think this is a very measured approach. And she even went to pains to state that this is not guided by anything political, politically wise. But yet, and at the same token, we heard that I think it was Miles Briggs this afternoon was demanding the head of Jean Freeman, and basically politicising the whole.
It doesn't. It seems that the SNP, no matter what it does, is going to be criticised by the pro-UK parties or the UK-based parties. Yeah. One of my concerns, Chris, I don't know if you will agree with me here, but one of the things which I have seen in this anyway, I don't know if you agree, but it seems to me that the lockdown is being enforced obviously by the Scottish government. But I noticed even today that there was a massive increase in the number of people on the roads today. It's almost as if they think it's all over. And I'm wondering whether the message is actually getting muddied a bit by the continued feed of news from south of the border.
Well, I don't know so much about the messages and stuff like that getting mixed up between, north and south of the border. I think it's down to, I think it was Alison Johnson was saying that it's, people after 8 weeks are naturally getting, complacent. And especially with the good weather and stuff like that, and
You think they're just thinking, oh well, it doesn't matter because I'm not going to be going anywhere near anybody, so it's all right for me to go, drive 10 miles out of town to a beauty spot.
It is that, and but I mean, this going back to Nicola's sort of like plan, shall we like? I heard an excellent thing. The James, what's his name on LBC?
Yeah.
And he was
James
basically
O'Brien
saying that there is a detailed plan in Scotland to actually ease the lockdown, whereas in England there is no detailed plan and no desire for test, and isolate to run coincidentally with it. And he was basically saying, that if you get an instruction for how to build a shelf and stuff like that, then you follow the instructions.
Chris,
whereas Boris Johnson is basically saying, use your own imagination, use your own initiative.
Chris, there's one issue here which, having read through the route map documents today, in fact, maybe Day, I could bring you in on this, that it mentions that during the first phase of the lockdown easing, there will be border health control checks, but there doesn't seem to be any great detail on what these might be. I mean, what is a border health check going to look like, do you think? In your expertise in animal husbandry, obviously, you know what quarantine is about and health checks. What on earth does this mean, do you think?
Well, again, I keep saying, it's easy for us dealing with livestock because you can isolate them and you can, treat them.
And they do what they're told.
You can't do it with human beings to the same extent. We have all sorts of rules about the various diseases that livestock get. And when you bring new livestock onto your farm, you have to isolate them. They've got to be in a field with a sort of 3-meter border round about them. They're not allowed to sniff noses with anybody else. Yeah. They've got to be there for so many days. I think it's 3 weeks for Mydivisna and stuff like that. So, but we're used to it. So we can understand it all. I don't think human beings do understand because they've never really had to isolate the way that this particular virus is needing us to.
Okay, I was going to ask if I could bring you back in on this, Chris. People coming into the country from abroad. Now, the phase 1 mentions actually particularly border checks. Now, what I don't understand is which borders are being referred to. Is it the border between England and Scotland? Is it Glasgow Airport, or is it every entry point into Scotland?
I would suggest that it's every entry point into Scotland, Gordon, and it's going to be a mammoth task in order to do that. I think two months ago on this show, I said that it was, fairly easy to do in the location of Glasgow Airport. Obviously, I know that building inside out, and even Edinburgh Airport, for that matter, as well. There are plenty of places for it to take place. But we are basically talking about the main ports. Around the country, and obviously the main artery roads coming in from England. Basically you're looking at police presence.
Of course, Chris, they can't
mobile testing unit.
Chris, I was going to say that they can't close the border between Scotland and England because of the sheer amount of traffic flowing through it. But doing that kind of thing is obviously going to cause, what would you say, a constitutional crisis, because we would effectively be shutting Scotland off physically to people coming over from the English side.
Because anybody can jump in their car and drive up to Scotland, and Indeed. Then the very second you pass Gretna, you could get pulled over by the Scottish police and be detained for anything up to 3-4 hours as they check your car and check your license and check your MOT. And so, so you're only talking maybe about detaining people for about half an hour, 40 minutes or so, 1 hour at maximum.
Yeah. So there's very little that could be done, Chris, in half an hour by the police in checking somebody's credentials and their reason for travelling, I suppose. But I think surely we'd have to quarantine people for 14 days when they come into the country from anywhere, really, in order for this to be effective.
Yeah, and again, harking back to that conversation that I had 2 months ago, if someone comes in from an overseas flight and displays symptoms, then obviously the pertinent questions have to be asked and stuff like that. With regards to their length of stay, you will be able to determine that, or the date of their return ticket. And then, if they are displaying symptoms and they land in Scotland and they get quarantined, well, it's basically their own tough titties.
Surely, Chris, people coming into the country, whether they have symptoms or not, would really need to be quarantined, because they could be lacking all symptoms and still carry the disease. And we do not know. We don't know how long the virus might have been incubating.
I would prefer that they take some measures rather than no measures whatsoever, Gordon.
Yep. Well, they have to be the right measures, surely, Chris, rather than just taking measures that don't really work.
Yes, aye. But by the same token, what I am saying is that I would rather that we do something than do nothing at all.
Okay. Well, listen, let's leave that. Day, sorry, you have something else to add?
We'll start with very simple measures. And I saw that the Welsh police, they were fining drivers who were lined up one after the other to visit some beauty spot or other, and all of them got fined £70.
Well, that's a big deterrent, isn't it?
That certainly put a lot of people off. I know it doesn't solve the whole problem.
Well, if you think your trip
it's a message that goes out.
If you think your trip to the Welsh valleys or the beaches is going to cost you £70, it might make you think again.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to move to our next story, actually, which also is COVID related. Pupils will return to schools in August, subject to scientific advice that it's safe to do so, the Deputy First Minister John Swinney has confirmed. The schools will return on the 11th of August, 1 week earlier than planned for most pupils, whilst early learning and childcare settings will open over the summer. An agreement reached between councils, professional associations and parents' representatives means that schools will implement physical distancing measures such as providing seating that is 2 metres apart and staggering arrival, departure and break times. There will be increased hand washing or the use of hand sanitisers, enhanced cleaning, robust protocols for suspected and confirmed COVID-19 cases, and ongoing risk assessments that will be implemented. Class sizes will also be significantly reduced as a result of the new way of working, with most pupils spending around half their time in class and half learning at home. Time in school will increase further as soon as it's safe to do so. Teachers and other education staff will return in June, subject to appropriate safety assessments being completed to prepare and plan for the new way of working and welcoming pupils back. Existing hubs will continue to run to provide vulnerable children and those of key workers with childcare over the summer. The school estate will be expanded where necessary, and possibly the possible use of libraries, community halls, leisure centres, conference venues, or taking short-term leases of vacant business accommodation to increase the time children can spend with their teachers. Innovative use of the existing teachers and staff where necessary and to consider the role former teachers can play by returning to the classroom or teaching virtually to support home learning, I beg your pardon. So, Day, I'm not sure how you would respond to this. 11th of August is traditionally about a week, isn't it, before they normally would go back?
Yes.
But they seem to be suggesting that the children are going to attend school almost in kind of sittings, with half at home and half in school, maybe a switch around at some point during the week.
Yes. Well, that could be done.
Yeah.
Could be done.
The other thing I noticed from reading this evening before I came out was that they were suggesting that children would attend school for 2 or 3 days a week, and there would be a sort of long weekend in the first phase of this. So it would be a group of children in presumably at the beginning of the week, and then another group in later in the week. Do you think this is practical? Do you think the teachers will be able to manage this?
I suspect they probably will. To me, I just see such an opportunity here to take a great big hammer to the present style and method of teaching.
So you're referring to the curriculum for excellence.
Through, children who are practical learners, it must be sheer hell for them, tied to a desk all the time, sitting down, and not being able to get up and move about. I would like to see outdoor education more used. in my day when I was teaching and teaching art, okay, the weather didn't always allow it, but we spent a lot of time outside sketching and drawing and observing and learning. And biology teachers did the same. Well, you don't get that nowadays. We're all stuck inside in this square school.
Yeah.
In a square room.
And virtual reality is not the same, is it? You can't virtually sit and draw something. It doesn't have the same appeal at all.
Well, no, you can certainly still be very, very creative using a computer, especially nowadays. But I do think that things are going to have to change. But I do think it might just waken up this sort of dead kind of atmosphere that there is in schools.
Too much inactivity in the classroom, not enough practical.
Certainly, there's too much practical inactivity, physical inactivity. There might be plenty of mental activity, but then without the physical, the mental tends to slow down and die because you need that oxygen going around your body to stimulate your brain.
Well, that's an interesting viewpoint, Day, and I sort of respect your opinion as a former teacher. Chris, what's your view on this? School's going back on the 11th, and children spending half the time at home and half the time at school. Do you think it will work?
It's obviously welcome. It's a detailed plan in order to get the kids back to school. As you know, the Tories and Labour want us to do, but I would actually go one bit further. And if schools are going to go down to a possible 4-day week, then could we possibly actually see that we could actually operate the economy on a 4-day week as well?
Okay.
Well, who knows?
We have this chance. We have this chance, as Day pointed out, to reset the way that we actually operate the country. So this would be a good way to trial it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen,
I remember the 4-day week when we went into school for 4 days a week, and I don't remember it being that disruptive.
I think all that happens is the teaching just takes a little bit longer over the year. That's about it, really. Anyway, listen, I have to move on, unfortunately, to the next story. And that is at the Joint Ministerial Committee, the EU negotiations, virtual meeting today. The Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs, Mike Russell, told the UK government that it must agree to an extension to the Brexit transition period to avoid imposing a further major economic hit on top of the coronavirus. Mr. Russell said that deal or no deal, the end of the transition will hit the economy, and there is now a very real chance of a disastrous no deal outcome at the end of the year. Now, if I can come to you first, Chris, this obviously is a very political story, but let's deal with it quickly. What's your view on this, Chris? Will the British government, do you think, ask for an extension?
Quite clearly, Mike Russell is talking a load of sense, and the UK government are just totally not taking it on board. I did see a story during the week there where the EU were making very strong words towards Scotland's membership within the EU and the fact that we have been held captive by the tyrannous rule of Britain. So, I think he's making absolute sense, and it's absolute nonsense to pursue their dream of Brexit by using the pandemic as an excuse for a no deal.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Dave, you have an opinion on this one? Britain, should it go for an extension, or do you think it's better for us just to have a clean break and start over?
Well, because I never wanted to leave the EU in the first place, and my stance has not altered since then, or even before then. I feel I am a European, and I think the worst thing that has ever happened was that vote, that, in my opinion, an illegal vote to leave the EU. So you won't be surprised to hear that I agree with every word that Mike Russell says, and I hold his opinion very dearly. He's an extremely intelligent man.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Listen, I'm going to move to our next story now. The UK government has agreed to deal to acquire antibody tests, a spokesman for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said today, saying that tests would be free and health and care workers would be prioritised. Mass antibody testing is being considered by many countries as a way to speed the reopening of economies devastated by lockdowns and to introduce some more tailored social distancing measures. The UK government has been in talks with Swiss drugs maker Roche Holdings AG to buy accurate COVID-19 antibody tests, following the lead of European Union and United States, which have already given preliminary approval to the tests. Have we now agreed a deal on the antibody testing? The answer to that is yes, the spokesman told reporters, adding that Health Minister Matt Hancock would offer more details later on Thursday. The antibody tests, known as serology tests, show who has been infected, although it's not yet clear whether the presence of antibodies to the new coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 confers permanent immunity. Now, Dave, I'm going to come to you first on this. We're beginning to see some action now on testing, and this serology test, it appears at least to being presented to us as a UK-wide deal.
Right.
How useful do you think this kind of testing will be in planning the future?
I think it'll be useful.
In what way?
Well, I always get my antigens and antibodies muddled up.
Okay.
But I know that if my sheep get liver fluke, I can have a choice of tests to be done. I can do a worm test, which examines the feces, or I can have an antigen test,
right,
which tells you whether the white blood cells are fighting against the fluke.
think that's what's being spoken about here, Dave, is a serology, a blood-based test, I believe.
Is it? So
it's looking for antibodies in the blood, I think.
it's saying whether the sheep's body has actually suffered with the thing. Is that what it is? Yeah.
Well, that's a similar thing to what's being proposed for human beings in this case, I believe.
So it's going to tell us whether we've had it, but it still doesn't crucially tell us, well, of course it won't, but we still don't really know whether we can pass that on, even though we have managed to get rid of it.
Well, if I could come to you, Chris, for a moment. Another question which has popped up here, just at the end of the story, in fact, is the issue of immunity. Does this antibody test demonstrate that you are now immune, or is this just simply looking at your evidence that your body has had the virus in the past but doesn't confer any immunity on you?
I honestly couldn't answer that, Gordon. You have to be medically inclined in order to give a precise and coherent answer to that.
Of course, it would need to be followed up.
I would hope it is. But as I say, I'm just not medically qualified to comment on that.
If you knew, Chris, how many people in different places had already had the disease, it might at least, I suspect, give you an idea of how it has already spread, where it has spread to. And that information might be collated later.
Well, it could do, but you know, again, this is another one of these time will tell stories. Let's just welcome the fact that they are saying that these tests are going to be free. Well, I'm sorry, but we're talking about a Tory government. Nothing's for free under a Tory government. You will pay for it by some.
All right. Listen, Chris, I'll need to stop you there. We're moving on to our next story now. Downing Street has now performed a U-turn on the NHS surcharge and announced that all migrant NHS and care workers will join health workers already benefiting from exemption. A Number 10 spokesman put out this statement. The Prime Minister has asked the Home Office and the Department of Health and Social Care to remove NHS and care workers from the NHS surcharge as soon as possible. Work by officials is now underway on how to implement the change, and full details will be announced in the coming days. The SNP has welcomed Boris Johnson's screeching U-turn on the Tory NHS surcharge for NHS and care workers, following pressure from the SNP and campaigners. The long overdue move comes after Ian Blackford challenged Boris Johnson on the Tory policy at this week's Prime Minister's Questions, where the Tory leader continued to defend imposing the charge. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, also raised the issue with Johnson at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday. Among other voices calling for a U-turn on the policy was the former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, who introduced the fee in 2015. He was now urging the government to change its mind, just as Number 10 announced that it was dropping the surcharge. The fee of £400 rising to £624 in October applies to all people living in the UK from outside the European Economic Area. Doctors, nurses and paramedics are currently exempt from paying the charge for 1 year, but there was pressure for Number 10 to make this permanent and include migrant healthcare workers. Those now exempt will include all NHS workers, including porters and cleaners, and it will include independent health workers and social care workers. Chris, I'm going to turn to you first for your comment on this. This strikes me as not just being a screeching U-turn, but a very personal U-turn for Mr Johnson, given the fact that it was two care workers from outside the EU who actually nursed him through his own COVID-19 episode.
Yeah, you would have thought that he would have had some sort of Damocles moment or something like that. But this is actually also relating to, excuse me, very, very happy to hear this, because it actually means that the NHS surcharge will also apply to overseas health workers. Yeah. And that will greatly help my friends at Care for Cali, who, will get some relief from this. And hopefully they will be able to recruit more people, because of this change. So this is absolutely brilliant. I'm really, really pleased about this.
Thanks, Chris. Dave, as I was saying to Chris earlier on, this is a very personal kind of defeat for Mr Johnson, because as we were hearing today in other news items on other media, Mr Johnson had been nursed back to health by two workers from outside the European Union, and both of those poor people were going to have to pay this enormous surcharge. And now we get this U-turn. Do you think the two things might be connected?
I'm a bit more sceptical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he might have a wee inkling of that, but equally he'll probably say, "All right, here's an opportunity to make me appear in a better light than I appear at the moment."
So you think he's maybe just currying favour a little bit with this U-turn?
Yes.
Gordon, could I be allowed to just make one wee point?
You are always allowed to make wee points, Chris. Please carry on.
The government was due to make this immigration health surcharge hike from £400 to £624 this October. And now that they've actually backpedaled on this, that is actually basically saving people that amount of money. But the point that I was wanting to make was related to a story last week where we have one of the British Army veterans, I believe he's from Fiji, was facing a £27,000 medical bill for injuries sustained whilst on active service. So if they can roll back on this,
well, I think it was a brain tumour he had, Chris. The man had a brain tumour, but yes, I agree with you. I think the most ironic thing about this story, just before we leave it, is the fact that, as I say, the two nurses who looked after Mr Johnson through his own ordeal of coronavirus were about to be charged £624 each for the very health services which they themselves are providing. That, I think, was the most ridiculous thing of all in this story.
Exactly.
Anyway, we're going to move on. Our next story concerns Palestine. Palestinians have suspended contacts with the CIA after announcing an end to security coordination with Israel and the United States in protest at Israeli proposals to annex territory on the West Bank, a Palestinian official said today. Saeb Erekat, Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, said that Washington had been told of the move after Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said on Tuesday that his administration was no longer committed to agreements with Israel and the United States, including on security coordination. On cooperation with the US Central Intelligence Agency, Erekat told reporters in a video call it stopped as of the end of the Palestinian president's speech. Intelligence cooperation with the CIA continued even after the Palestinians began boycotting US peace efforts led by President Donald Trump in 2017, with the sides working together on heading off violence in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Now, Chris, I know that you have strong views on the issue of the Palestinians. How do you read this? Why are the Palestinians doing this now, do you think?
Well, I mean, basically they're doing it now because
as briefly as possible.
This actual blueprint suggested by Trump has actually been endorsed by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. And it calls for a creation of a demilitarized Palestine that would exclude the Jewish settlements built in the occupied territories. Basically they would remain under pretty much near total control of the Israeli security agencies.
It was never going to work with them, was it? They could never accept that, Chris. I'm sure.
Of course not. No. Because at the end of the day, it flies in the face of the two-state solution that the Palestinians peacefully want to achieve.
Okay. Listen, Chris, I'll have to stop you there. We're a little short on time. I'll read the next story. I'll come back to you, Day, just in a moment. This one also concerns America. In the Trump administration's latest move to pull the United States from a major global treaty, the United States has today announced its intention to withdraw from the 35-nation Open Skies Treaty, which allows unarmed surveillance flights over member countries. The administration said that Russia has repeatedly violated the pact's terms. Senior officials said the pullout will formally take place in 6 months based on the treaty's withdrawal terms. NATO allies and other countries like Ukraine have been pressing Washington not to withdraw from the treaty, and Trump's decision could aggravate tensions within the alliance. The administration also pulled the United States out of intermediate-range nuclear forces treaties with Russia last year. Officials speaking on condition of anonymity to a small group of reporters said that the decision followed a 6-month review that found multiple instances of Russian refusal to comply with the treaty. At the same time, the official said that US officials had begun talks in recent days with Russian officials about a new round of nuclear arms negotiations to begin crafting the next generation of nuclear arms control measures. The Open Skies Treaty, initially proposed by the US President Dwight Eisenhower in 1955, was signed in 1992 and took effect in 2002. The idea is to let member nations make surveillance flights over each other's countries to build trust. Trump's decision to abandon the Open Skies Treaty could indicate that he will allow a New START treaty to lapse. He has until February to extend it for up to 5 years. It's the last remaining restraint on deployments of US and Russian strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems to no more than 1,550 each. This could trigger a new arms race that China would likely join. Day, I'm going to come to you first here because unfortunately you missed the last round of comments. Now this is obviously
not very good on this sort of thing.
This seems to be a pattern with Mr. Trump. He does seem, doesn't he, to be pulling out of treaties all over the place at the moment. Why? What do you think is his motive for this, if he has one?
Oh, I don't think he has one. It's just, as long as he's doing something different from his predecessor, it seems to make him happy. And, the fact that he's causing such stress around the whole world passes him by entirely.
So do you think this is mainly to play to the political audience in America that he's doing these things.
Yes.
So it's basically kind of grandstanding.
Not that I'm excusing the Russian premier either. In one way, Trump is right in that Russia does do far too many surveillance things and takes advantage. They've been given an inch, they've taken a mile. But just the same, for Trump to behave like that is just pathetic.
Okay. Chris, if I can bring you into this from your side. Well, one of the things that struck me about this is that the original treaty was designed by Eisenhower to build trust. Surely what Mr. Trump is doing is destroying the trust.
Yes.
Yeah, and Trump is no Eisenhower by any manner of means.
I think, that's a bit of an understatement there, Chris.
You said today, I totally agree with you. It's just grandstanding, and it's just basically, I'm going to do something different than any other US president, and people will be talking about me all around the world.
Well,
that is true.
Dave, you got something more to add?
No, I just think that Chris is right. People are talking about him all around the world. The fact that they're saying they're realizing what a dreadful man he is seems to go right over the top of his head. Why would anybody want to be remembered for the sort of dreadful stuff that Trump has imposed on the world?
Well, I dare say it will show up in the ballot box next year. Apparently, he's not doing terribly well in opinion polls right now. Anyway, let's bring it back to British politics now. A Liberal Democrat lord accused of milking the taxpayer by taking money from the government's furlough scheme and claiming his peer's allowance has apologised and said he will repay the Treasury. Lord Fox, the party's business spokesperson in the House of Lords, has used the job retention scheme to pay himself as the owner of a strategic communications firm and claimed his £162 daily allowance for his work as a peer. The Telegraph reported that he had a £100,000 cash pot in his company and owned 2 homes worth more than £2 million. Mr. Fox said today, "I recognise my error in judgment and I apologise. I have already begun to repay the money I received as part of the furlough scheme and intend to repay the full amount as soon as possible." The Tory MP, Richard Halfon, said that Fox had been milking the taxpayer at both ends and urged him to repay the money. He said the scheme had not been intended for people of Fox's means. He's the sole employee of Volpes Advisory and has taken an initial payment from the furlough scheme for 1 month's wage subsidy of around £1,000. His work in the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee, which is being done virtually, has involved 4 sessions so far, for which he was entitled to claim about £650. Chris, very briefly from you, another MP milking the system and has been caught with his hands in the till, as it were.
Well, I mean, honestly, an error of judgment?
Yes.
I mean, really?
It was an accident. I didn't mean to do it.
If you and I done that, normal Joe Soap, the bubble dancer,
it's usually called fraud, street, isn't it? That kind of thing.
It's fraud.
Yeah.
It's pure and simple. It's fraud against the government, and he should be charged by the police, and he should be put in prison for it. Well, that's what would happen to you and I in the street if we'd done that, Gordon.
It certainly is. It's not legal anyway. I'm certain of that. Pretty certain. But unfortunately, in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. But then again, the fact that I don't think it's legal doesn't make any difference. It's probably just my misunderstanding of the law. It certainly doesn't sound very moral anyway, Chris, does it?
Well, no. I mean, at the end of the day, I can say hand on heart, right? And if he's watching, if I'm wrong, take me to court and sue my arse, because that is nothing. There is no dressing it down in any such way, shape, or form. It is willful theft, and that is it.
Okay,
the guy
well, Chris,
knew what he was doing.
Chris, of course, that is your opinion. You're entitled to hold it. In Broadcasting Scotland, we don't have an opinion on this particular item. Dave, if I can bring you in very briefly on this. Another peer, it seems, just trying to get a little bit of extra money somehow or other. He surely can't have done this by mistake.
No, absolutely not. And not just him, but so many others are making these mistakes. And have done over the last decade or so. And what we are seeing is a moral gap, or a moral, like flowing over a waterfall, going down and down and down in our parliament, where the morals that we used to have just aren't there anymore. The lies that are accepted and people aren't brought to book about them, because you're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to call them a liar in Parliament.
I think what struck me about this day was the fact that this man is so wealthy, and the sum of money being claimed is actually relatively small. It just seems rather petty. Do you not think? You know, he's what we would call a chancer, really, isn't he, in Scottish parlance? Yeah. Anyhow, speaking of chancellors, let's move on to our next story. Boris Johnson has avoided a criminal investigation into his relationship with the US businesswoman Jennifer Arcuri while he was the Mayor of London. But he'll face further investigation into his conduct when he was Mayor, after the Independent Office for Police Conduct found evidence that officials were influenced by the close relationship between the pair. Johnson was formally referred to the watchdog in September because he was the head of the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime at the time when Arcuri received public money and access to trade trips led by him when he was Mayor. Arcuri was awarded thousands of pounds in public money, including £11,500 by the Mayor's promotional agency London and Partners. Johnson's office also intervened to give her a place on trade missions to New York and Tel Aviv with Johnson, after she was initially turned down because she failed to meet the criteria. The IOPC concluded that no criminal inquiry was required following an 8-month scoping exercise into whether Johnson should be investigated for misconduct in public office over his friendship with Arcuri. But its 112-page report did say that Johnson should have declared an interest in Arcuri, and that his failure to do so could have amounted to a breach of the London Assembly's Code of Conduct. The IOPC recommended that the Greater London Authority conduct a review of L&P policies and processes around the payment of sponsorship money. The London Assembly said it would resume its investigation after the decision, with Len Duval, the Greater London Authority's Oversight Committee chairman, saying the IOPC was looking specifically at whether he committed a criminal offence. That is not our remit, and their decision doesn't have any real bearing on our investigation, which will focus on his conduct as the Mayor of London. Now, again, come to you first, Chris, on this one. Here's Mr. Johnson, and it's alleged that he has had a relationship with this young woman, and this has led to some favouritism from Mr. Johnson when he was the Mayor in the spending of public funds.
Well, I really better not comment on this because, again, this just smacks of, something really, really dubious. And I'm not going to say what I think want to say, but there was something seriously going on, and for the CPS not to find anything to criminally charge him. I think that's actually been done because of the current situation that we're in, and I think that had he not have been made the Prime Minister, then I think it could have had a different outcome. But again, exactly like the last story, it's just someone taking advantage of the situation and getting away with it.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, coming to you with this one. Mr. Johnson is alleged to have had a relationship with this young woman and has used she has used him as a way of gaining favour, of gaining access to foreign markets and money to develop her business. And this is the allegations, or one of the allegations that have been made. Mr. Johnson, he just seems to be made out of Teflon, doesn't he? All of these accusations just seem to slide off.
That's right. That's right. He's got access to very good lawyers.
I guess he must have.
I mean, if we look back at the Frenchgate business with,
Was that you think about Alistair Carmichael, the French?
Yeah, it wasn't a criminal act, and it wasn't a lie, and it's all down to the way that they look at the laws and what have you.
Yeah.
But mud sticks, and Johnson will always be remembered for being the kind of man that he is, and not to be trusted. So
well, I mean, Sleaze
he may not be
I was going to say
charged.
that in the past, Sleaze has brought down Conservative governments before now. And the amount of sleaze that seems to be carrying on is is growing every day. Anyway, I would like to move on to our penultimate story for this evening. The remit of the independent public inquiry into the death of Sheku Bayoh has been announced. The Justice Secretary, Hamza Yousaf, has said that the statutory public inquiry will examine the circumstances leading up to the death of Mr. Bayoh, the post-incident management process and subsequent investigation into his death. The inquiry will also establish the extent to which Mr. Bayoh's actual and perceived race played a part in the events, if any. In addition, the inquiry will make recommendations to prevent deaths in similar circumstances. Now, my memory on this is a little hazy. Chris, do you remember this case, Mr. Bayoh? I think he died in police custody, if I remember correctly. Am I right?
Yeah, I do remember the case, and I've been following it quite avidly. Close colleague and comrade Amir Anwar has been representing the family all throughout this, and this latest step is basically to try and establish if the unfortunate death of Mr. Bayoh was actually racially motivated. So it's a horrendous episode for the whole family to try and get some sort of closure into the surroundings of his untimely demise, and there's a lot of serious questions that need to be answered by the Scottish Police with regards, what actually happened, and I mean, could it have been prevented? We don't know, but the one thing that we can be thankful for is the fact that the family have got representation from one of our most learned and absolutely
great human rights lawyer,
humanitarian lawyers.
Yeah. Listen, thanks for that, Chris. Just before I leave you, Chris, one thing I was going to ask you, because I can't remember the exact circumstances of this story, can you refresh our memories a little bit on the circumstances surrounding Mr. Bayoh's death? He died in custody, didn't he? But the circumstances were unusual?
Well, yeah, they were unusual, to say the least, and there have been countless allegations, and I wouldn't like to go through all of them, as it's still very much a live case.
Yeah, I believe he was in restraint at the time, Chris, when he died.
Well,
or he was being restrained.
These are the things that have not been conclusively dismissed or proven, and there seems to be a severe overload of use of force on this one case, and it has been suggested that for the force that was used, you would think that the officers were actually trying to pin down the Incredible Hulk.
So the allegations here, Chris, are really about the amount of appropriate force or or the officers apparently have been cleared of that
Yes,
wrongdoing.
aye. But what the allegations are today is to see that if there were any incidents of a racial element towards Mr. Sheku Bayoh, from his time of arrest to the time of his untimely death.
Okay, Dave, if I might just bring you in briefly on this story. It is a very sad tale. The man has died in police custody. I mean, other people have died in police custody as well. And of course, they will always be looking at other cases with similar circumstances. And I think this inquiry is actually going to look at this particular incident and to try and compare it with others and see if there is, as Chris was mentioning, a racial element to this.
So is it more about the inquiry more about the racial element, or is it also about the level of restraint?
It is specifically about looking for evidence of racism, or whether there was an element of racism in the circumstances of this case. So anyway, I'll go back to the inquiry itself and have a look at what it actually says. It says the public inquiry will examine the circumstances leading up to the death of Mr. Bayoh in a post-incident management process and the subsequent investigation. So it's going to look at the thing from beginning to end, including the other investigations already done. It says the inquiry will also establish the extent to which Mr. Bayoh's actual or perceived race played a role in the events, if any. Now, I think the word perceived is an interesting one to add here. His perceived race. I'm not sure quite what they mean by that. Whose perception do we think they're looking at? The officers? Anyway, they're looking at the whole incident in the round, including any racial aspects to it which might have existed. So it's a pretty comprehensive examination. Okay, we're coming up to our last story, and this one is a favourite of mine because I have an interest in this. And the UK's space race heats up as Skyrora effectively made UK ready for launching rockets into space after a team successfully built a mobile launch complex and completed a full static fire test of the Skylark L rocket on it. In only 5 days, Skyrora's combined achievement also signifies the first vertical static fire of this magnitude in the United Kingdom since the Black Arrow programme 50 years ago. The Skylark L rocket could be ready to launch from a British spaceport as early as the spring in 2021 and the inaugural launch to low Earth orbit Skyrora XL rocket by 2023. Now, just before we go, I should mention to both of you, this company, although British, is based in Edinburgh and it does most of its testing in Scotland. So we have a new space race starting, quite a remarkable achievement for a small startup. Chris, what do you think? The start of a new space industry, launch industry.
Can we get one of the first pilots to be Jackson Carlo, possibly co-piloted by Richard Leonard?
That's often the first thing people say to me when I mention rockets and launching things into space. But this is quite serious. They are planning to launch from Scotland, and they have made their HQ in Edinburgh. Dave, just from your point of view, would be welcome here, Dave, as well.
Being serious, it shows the level of commitment that the Scottish entrepreneurs have got in research and development, and also puts Scotland on the map with regards any sort of like space programme, and it would possibly help for the future development of the proposed space stations further up in the Highlands, maybe even Prestwick Airport as well. So it's a welcome development, and we'll just have to obviously watch this space.
Okay, if I could involve you in this day, this is actually an event which happens in the Scottish Highlands. I mean, this company.
Yeah, I know. I just think it's wonderful because I remember, was it last year or the year before, when 3 notoriously daft Tory MSPs poo-pooed the fact that somebody had talked about Scotland being ahead in the space race. And they knew nothing about this.
Well, I'm delighted by it because I have been and interviewed the owner of the company, and I've also witnessed one of their test firings at their other test location on the River Forth, and it's a very impressive setup that they have. Anyway, we're coming up to 8 o'clock, and of course the time for applauding the NHS is almost upon us in about 5 seconds from now. And it's coming up to 8 o'clock now. So let's have a round of applause for our NHS, as is our tradition on this programme on a Thursday. Chris is exiting his front door at the moment to see who is dancing or playing the bagpipes on his street this evening. Chris, what's the situation outside your house tonight?
Somebody's laying out the window with a tambourine.
Oh, that's interesting.
Cara is running, further up the.
She's just out of range.
So I'm not going to chase her tonight. But it's all very well, clapping for the NHS, but. Why don't we do a novel thing, and actually pay them a good living wage?
Here, Chris. I couldn't agree more.
The horrendous terms and conditions that they're currently on at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think many people would agree with you, Chris. Anyway, Chris, if you'd like to come back in and take a seat before the computer again, we can wind the show up. So once Chris is seated back again on his comfy sofa, can wind up the show for tonight. And of course, as Chris is getting comfortable, it's my duty tonight, as usual at this time, to ask you to support Broadcasting Scotland. As you know, we are run by volunteers, and we are the best alternative at the moment that there is to Sarah Smith. So if you would like to see more programmes made by Broadcasting Scotland, free to view, as always, without adverts, then please become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. And you can do that by following the instructions in the bottom of the screen now. Go to www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register and then follow the prompts. Anyway, that's it from the Thursday edition of Scotland at 7 for this week. And my thanks again to my two guests this evening, to Day Tucker and to Chris McCusker. I will be back again on Monday. In the meantime, I hope you have a great Friday and a safe weekend. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.